I'm going to talk really, and the prelude this morning from the terrific speakers we had was just wonderful, because what I'm really going to talk about in a very short 8-minute slot is really how things can change and how things have changed in my particular case, the witnessing of that change over, for me, what was 34 years since my journey began. The first part that I'd like to start is right back in 1982, actually, when I was 15 years old. And I'd never really thought about energy. Hadn't really occurred to me very much. But, you know, like most high school kids, at one point in my high school, they dragged us into an auditorium like this and showed us an absolutely terrifying black and white film about where to hide under a desk if there was a nuclear attack. I don't know if many of you remember, but for me, that was the first time I ever really sort of started to think about what was going on and the implications of energy around the world. Back then, you know, the Franklin River was being blockaded, the ALP had relaxed their anti-uranium policy, and I really started to think about, you know, the implications, particularly of uranium. It was about that same time that I attended my very first protest. I didn't know anyone, I just heard that there was an anti-uranium protest going on, so with a combination of tasting beer for the first time, I went to a protest and, you know, kind of started to think about what I could do to influence the world and change things. Interesting, back in 1992, it was also when Hans Tholstrup and Larry Perkins built a solar car and drove it from Perth to Sydney. So, you know, that was the first time anything like that had ever happened, and really brought solar to the fore for a lot of people in Australia. I've got slides here that are sort of taking you through the journey as well. I'm not going to rattle off the statistics, but there are a few statistics about where the industry's at, and I've been lucky. I've raised 3 children and made a living for the last 23 years, a humble living, but a living nonetheless, bringing up 3 kids. And so this kind of traces the journey through where we've gone. And I'm going to jump forward a few years here now. We get to 1986. We've got, you know, Russell Street bomb exploded, and, you know, again, following this story of how things can change, would you believe 1986 was when homosexuality was decriminalised in New South Wales, right? It seems like a million years ago, but it's not that long ago. Maralinga nuclear tests were in the news. I heard about climate change for the first time, actually, when I was lucky enough to attend a presentation. So that was the first time that term had actually been thrown up at me as a young man. And it got me thinking again. It was also about the time when I went to Europe, as you did. You get a girlfriend, go to Europe, get a combi, have no money, drive around. And it also happened to be about the same time that Chernobyl exploded, which is fairly inconvenient if you're trying to live off $10 a day and eat fruit, because some of that fruit had nuclear radiation symbols on it. You're in a different country and you've got to try and find out how to get non-radiated fruit because Chernobyl had blown up. So it was very inconvenient. But again, you know, that image for me at that time of ancient Russian helicopters dropping dudes in leather aprons onto the top of a smouldering nuclear reactor just changed me. It absolutely changed me. I thought there's got to be a better way to make electricity than having to have ramifications like this. So once again, it was the second time in my life that I suddenly thought to myself, wow, there's a real implication for flipping a switch. I'd never had to worry about it until then, but those kinds of images were really etched in my mind. So I started to get angry then. Luckily, there was some action that I was able to get involved with, and there was punk music. So, you know, that cured me for the time being. But I couldn't get into the industry yet, so it took me a little while. But fast forward to 1993, as you can see, the industry's starting to grow. There's a bit of volume starting to go on. We're starting to rate in the world of solar. You know, Keating declared us a banana republic. Thatcher's harsh reign was drawing to an end. Salt and pepper was still cool. Duran Duran hadn't gone away, you know. And I'm 25 by this time. At 25, I got my first child and my first mobile phone. Again, seems like forever ago, but look where we're at now. Things do change as you go. I decided that the automotive industry where I was working back then was far too volatile and erratic, and I wanted to get into something stable that would have a nice smooth trajectory, so I jumped out and got into solar. I'm nothing if persistent, I guess. But I left the automotive industry. I moved up to Nimbin, which at that time was ground zero for solar energy. Bless those hippies. They actually know what they're doing, and they're still going today. And the guys at Nimbin who'd set up that company, it was the first grid-connected solar factory in Australia, would you believe? And we had wind power, solar power. We had a biomass-fired boiler out the back that made great pizzas and could make electricity. It was a testament to what was possible, and we did great projects around Australia and all around the world. And so I'd been up there for a year or so. It was also around that time that the Kyoto Agreement was signed, of course. I'm ending my first year in the industry up on the North Coast with a new phone and a new child. So around that time, I remember having great debates because everything we did was off-grid. It's ironic that 23 years ago I started in solar and all we did was storage systems, and now I've done this circulus route and here I am back to storage again 23 years later. Everything's been done before, but here we are back again. And at that time when I was up there, I remember sitting in the boardroom. I was the chairman of the board and we were saying, where are we going to be? Where are we going to take this company? And we had this big debate about whether people in the cities would put solar on. And we had this vigorous debate amongst us. They're never going to do that. It's all going to be about people in the bush. It's all going to be about battery systems. It makes no sense. It's not economically viable. And around that same time, just about an hour up the road from here, some enterprising individuals raised some money, decided to do a pilot project, and the very first grid-connected system was put in just an hour up the road at Mount Coolum. Still there, still operational today. Great example. And that guy it was $27 a watt, by the way. So it was 40 grand for a 1.4 kilowatt system. We can do a better deal than that today. But it showed what was possible, and it showed that that it was going to happen. Fast forward a few more years, 1997. I've been working with these guys for a few years now, and of course, as you did back then, if you were working for those guys, you lived in a very, very, very humble little home. I had 120 watts of solar and a couple of batteries under the porch and a little micro hydro running up the spring. That was it. That was our power system, and we managed to survive. It was a pretty humble living, but it taught me about all sorts of things, about how careful you had to be with energy if you wanted to really do this properly, and how much you, in fact, could live without energy. My daughter, who was very, very young at the time, is now 24, and irritates the crap out of her flatmates because she was brought up in this environment where energy was precious. So, if nothing else, we left a legacy for her, and she's teaching others. I also remember being interviewed in a local paper around that time, doing some press and saying, people in the city will be able to put a few panels on their roof, connect up and sell the excess. It's still a few years to go, but one day we'll be competitive and we think it'll happen. So there you go, here we are today with 1.5 million people. I'm behind a couple of slides now, aren't I? There you go. There's the factory. Terrific example, best building I've ever worked in. You can see the little graph on the bottom that started to appear here. Now, this is actually the percentage of solar of the NEM. So, we didn't really rank, and listening to all the stories earlier on about the disruption that we're causing, back in these days, I can remember we're actually going to network conferences and energy association conferences, and they'd all say, sure, come in, you're irrelevant. Right? You are not going to affect us, so you want a rebate? Sure, have a rebate. You want a feed-in tariff? Have a feed-in tariff. It's never really going to affect us. We don't care. You're immaterial, so just go right ahead. And that was literally the attitude that we had from a lot of those guys. They just didn't really believe it was ever going to happen. So I moved to in 2000. Where are we up to? 19 years. There we are, 2000. So things were starting to change. By 2000, I was back in the city. I picked up a job with what was then the only manufacturer of solar panels in Australia. So I actually got to work in a factory for 12 years. I worked with what was a great company, and then collapsed sadly, like so many. But around that time, we were starting to see Grid Connect Solar emerging, and in fact, it was around that time I remember coming to Brisbane. We'd actually launched and patented the very first Grid Connect Solar kit. in Australia. Hadn't been done before, but we thought, no, we'll give it a crack. We'd seen it happening overseas with our other companies that we had around the world, especially in Germany, and there was so much going on in Germany at that time. We could see that it was going to start to come. So we launched a kit and patented some great technology, and I remember coming up to Brisbane, bringing all my dealers in and saying, guys, you've really got to get on this Grid Connect stuff. And I had a room with about 50 guys who just turned around, looked at each other, and they literally said, Nigel, we're doing all this off-grid stuff. We've got the islands, we've got the remote stuff. It's a small market, but, you know, it's the business we know. And frankly, there's no place for this fancy schmancy city stuff. It's never going to take off. Don't worry about it. You know, meanwhile, we're back at the factory. We managed to do a fantastic project on the Olympic Village, 950 homes in the Olympic Village. Actually, I had a call from an owner the other day, believe it or not, who somehow tracked me down and said, I think it's your fault. My system's got a problem. But, you know, that was 15 years ago. And she said, I'm not disappointed. It was 15 years ago and it's all part of the house. And so there's some great communication I'm having now with former owners. And that was, at the time, one of the biggest solar suburbs in the world, would you believe? You know, 950 systems, that was a major coup. And of course, there's the solar lighting. There's a lot of great solar stuff around the Athletes Village and the precinct. Still not ranking here, 0.1, but not a blip on a chart, right? So fairly easy, fairly minimal penetration. And it wasn't long after that I'd moved back to the city that then the federal government started launching a series of rebates and support programs, and Solar Cities was one of them. There were a number of terrific projects that we got involved with all around the country doing some great stuff in Solar Cities. So it's now starting to happen. By 2000, there were actually people who you could sell a system to. There were notable projects happening. Australia was still right up there. We were a small share of the global market. Global market was 200 megawatts a year, for what it's worth. To put that in context, in Australia in its biggest year was 1,000 megawatts. So the whole market in 2000 was only a couple of hundred meg. So, you know, it's really been absolutely meteoric, this change, when it did start. Fast forward a few more years, 2007. By 2007, there were literally thousands and thousands of people employed in solar. And really, you know, I wanted to make this point at the beginning and I forgot, so I'm going to make it now. I'm just one of tens of thousands of people, many of whom have been in the industry for as long as I have, who have raised their families, paid their mortgages, you know, paid for their kids' education and made an honest living out of trying to sell good solar systems out there. So, you know, I acknowledge all those other people as well who have also battled on, and some of them are here today in the room. But thousands and thousands of people employed. And interestingly, here's another graph that's popped up. When you look at where those people are employed, despite what the haters will tell you, most of them are actually in rural or semi-regional areas. It's a great employment business for solar people. It employs predominantly small businesses. The majority of solar companies are SMEs, which is the mainstay of the economy of Australia. So it's great to see some of the big corporations getting in, but this is really a great economic boost for the entire country. And at its peak, the solar industry has employed as many as we think probably 15 or 20,000 people directly, with indirect employment of another 10 or 15,000 people. So literally one of the biggest employment sectors in the country on several occasions. I'm flipping forward here to 2015, so now I'm really moving. And interestingly, another graph that's popped up here is employment in different sectors. My eyesight's terrible, but the number one there, this was 2013 data, the number one there with about 27,000 employees was electricity distribution. So the electricity industry will tell you that, you know, solar's irrelevant and, you know, there's all these jobs at risk if we diminish the relevance of the traditional electricity industry. Well, guess what? If you look at the numbers, in distribution there's about 27,000 employed, and at that point in time we had 21,000 direct in solar. So we're nearly as big as the entire electricity distribution employment in the country. And then the next one down's electricity generation. Oops, that's done something weird. Okay. Can I go back to preview full screen? There we go. Electricity generation only employs about 10,000. Sales and marketing, about 4,000. Transmission, mere 2,500. Gas supply, 2,000. Hydro generation, 1,200. Solar is one of the biggest energy employment sectors, bar none, in this country. Don't believe it if they say otherwise. Also become a big industry, 2 billion at its peak, somewhere around 3 or 3.5 billion, depending on when you look at it. So a huge generator of tax and GST and everything else. Great deal. Lots and lots of employments. But here, this little graph's a bit hard to see, but this is the solar coaster that we've all been talking about. So rebates come, rebates go. And this is literally the states and the national take-up of solar over a period of years. And for anyone like me who's been in that, it's, it literally is a roller coaster. It's boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust. Another little graph, we're starting to appear down here now, right? 7% of national capacity. 7%. That's from, not even appearing on a graph earlier on. Global PV's now got to 45,000 megawatts, 45 gigawatts. Our share had kind of bumped and lumped, but we'd got up to 2% and in fact had been one of the biggest solar markets in the world for some time. A whole lot of interesting things were happening around 2015. By then I'd moved into consulting. The industry had gone through a very volatile period and literally hundreds of solar businesses were collapsing. Been very, very tough for everyone in business. The other interesting stat for you, by 2015, or in fact, by the end of 2015, I realised it had been 3.5 years since I'd commuted on my petrol bike. I've actually been able to commute for 3.5 years now purely on an electric motorcycle, charged off my solar system at home. So, it shows over this progression of time that things do change. Things can change. It's a slow march sometimes, but it has happened. We've got Nyngan with 1.3 million panels now. 1.3 million panels on one particular site. Of course, along the way, the Prime Minister decided that, my favourite quote, if you're trying to describe the politics in Australia, is that coal's good for humanity. Frankly, what an idiot, really. But I've witnessed this over the years, and it is so crucial what our leaders say, because... One minute? Okay, thanks. It's so crucial because that wiped consumer confidence. Solar consumer confidence was smashed because people went, oh, hang on, are we a problem? They don't like politicians, but they do hear what they say. They do listen to it. So it can be devastating. I'm going to jump to 2017 now. So we're moving out in the future. Where are we going to be? Of course, everyone's talking about solar. Interestingly, the value of the industry is going down now. Even though the volume's kind of flat, we're still kind of chugging along, but of course we're selling it for less now. So it's a hard industry to be in. So all the other businesses like me battling away now, selling the same volume for less money. The number of people employed's gone down, but we're still there. Globally, we're still in a reasonable place. Our shares hovering around 1.5%. But look at this, right? We're 10%, right? Material to all those network guys. There's a good network guy in the room, but all the rest of them are knobs. And frankly, I say because all those years ago when they were telling us that we were never going to be material and we were never going to happen, and the same thing is happening with storage now, right? They're saying storage, it's going to be 10 years, 20 years away. Guess what? There's already 200 systems a month being sold in Australia, and it's just about to take off. It's got a way to go. It's not a silver bullet, and it's not for everyone, but there you go. That's a quick journey through 34 years and my experience. Have a fantastic rest of the conference.